Check out the newest member of the Georgia State House. She is making history not once, but twice in Georgia's election.
First Palestinian elected to any public office in the state. Joining me now is that state representative-elect Ruwa Romman of Georgia. She represents the state's 97th district in Gwinnett County.
Being a politician means that you're a public servant, and I think we need to recenter that.
The granddaughter of Palestinian refugees, Romman never intended to call herself a lawmaker.
I did not plan to run.
Romman attended a training for minorities prepping to get into politics.
So what I'm about to read to you is frankly very sanitized. It was meant to have an opportunity to represent a Palestinian voice, but I'm incredibly dismayed because we came here to offer a gift. We came here to offer an opportunity to bridge the gap between our party and our voters, because when you looked around that convention, everybody, you literally looked around, so many people wearing their pins, their kufiyas, their flags. It's very unfortunate.
Issa. Okay. Issa? Yes. Issa Galloway.
Issa Galloway defines the mission.
Kind of a show that will put people on the edge of their seat.
Because it leads to the future in a more sophisticated approach.
Welcome back to the show, guys. I have an amazing guest for you today. It is Georgia State Representative Ruwa Romman. And let me get her name up here on the screen for you. And then welcome, Representative Ruwa. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Walaikum assalam. How are you?
Oh, excellent. I am geeking out to have you here because I've been following you on social media. And of course, like many Americans, I found out about you when you were trying to endorse the vice president for her presidential run, and then she refused. And, you know, the DNC didn't allow any Palestinian speakers. And that blew my mind. And then I started to look into you, and I saw that you were doing amazing and innovative things. Like instead of running to the right, you just doubled down on your policies and did a lot of community outreach focused on your constituents and just was true to who you were all the time, instead of trying to like means test your policy and try to change, you know, with these narrative building issues. And so I really wanted to have you on because, you know, this channel is all about exploring like the intersection of our civil liberties, our identity, and civic participation. And because you had like the courage to kind of do like vote swapping after everything, even though you're a Democrat, you know, elected official, I wanted to just start off like, what did it feel like going through all that drama where, you know, we had all this hope that a new administration might end the genocide, that then it was just this cold reality of like, you couldn't even have a Palestinian speaker who wants to endorse her.
Yeah, so, you know, first, truly thank you for having me, because I do want
Pleasure.
as many opportunities as possible to like reach people where they are, right? And to your point about like our community, and, you know, when you said like, yeah, I heard about you from this moment at the DNC, but then I saw what you've been doing, and this is just kind of like who you've always been, makes me a little happy, because that is the entire point of all of this, right? I wasn't somebody that had spent years planning to run for office and had, you know, set up all these steps to do so. It kind of happened. I joke that my community kind of bullied me into it. When I say community, I'm talking about like my organizing community, my Muslim community, my Arab community. Like, it was a lot of people here in Georgia that came together and said, you have got to do this. And the DNC thing, kind of a lot like that, right? It wasn't planned. I was in Chicago actually for a panel with Arab American Institute. I didn't even have DNC credentials. I've had a rule since the Bernie Sanders primary of 2016 to not touch the DNC for a few reasons. And one of them is that it's actually not as influential of an organization as people think it is. It doesn't do necessarily recruitment for races, for example. It doesn't help candidates like me. I don't even have a DNC contact. Like, there are people who are involved in the DNC that I talk to, right? But if you asked me, for example, explain to me the staffers and all of that, I wouldn't be able to, because it's just not part of the ecosystem that frankly moves politics. It's just mostly a political and legal entity to move money for ads and presidential related logistics. That's why you don't really hear from them outside of every 4 years, because that's their role. But the uncommitted movement, which I still, you know, think did an incredible job of, one, keeping people engaged at a time when they could have completely become silent. But two, they had been working with DNC people to work through getting a speaker. To be clear, this wasn't something that happened the week of, right? They had been in negotiations for months, thanks to everybody that voted in the primary to send a clear message, gave them a negotiating position, which is why I always say inside and outside actually are intertwined way more than we like to think it does. But they've been negotiating for months on policy positions, of course, to end weapons shipments to Israel. But in addition to that, sort of a more symbolic gesture of having a Palestinian speaker. Didn't matter who it was. To be clear, they gave them everything from elected officials to donors to impacted families to volunteer. I mean, you name it. Every possible type of person impacted by the genocide in Gaza was put on that list. And that to me was really fascinating. But then the week of the DNC, they kept being told it looks good, you're not getting a no, it looks good, you're not getting a no. And I was kind of a Hail Mary. It was actually me and Representative Abdel Nasser in Illinois, who's also Palestinian, as the like public names that were finally expressed when they were asked, hey, are you gonna have a speaker on stage? Are you gonna have a speaker on stage? They said, we have a long list of speakers, and some of those recommended was, me and another Palestinian representative. And I remember sort of all these negotiations back and forth, and at one point there was hesitancy of what would the speaker even say. And it was Tuesday night, I think it was when Obama was on stage, and that's when I wrote my speech, literally typed out on a phone. I said, if they're looking for an example of what a speech can look like, here's a super duper rough draft, barely a few minutes long. Everyone's like, oh, they couldn't have given them 10 minutes on stage. We weren't even asking for a specific time. And, it was deeply disappointing. I actually changed my flight and hotel several times because we were told not a no is a good thing, not a no is a good thing. And then the night that we did the sit-in, a big part of why I joined was the fact that I saw Jeff Duncan, who used to be lieutenant governor in Georgia, ushered in incredibly terrible policies, right? Was now on stage with people like Liz Cheney talking to Democrats while we were outside. And that was sort of the moment for me where I engaged in the sit-in, because again, this was us trying to prevent what we are seeing today, which is a Trump presidency. And I think a lot of times people forget that a big part of this was so much bigger than us, right? It was to end the genocide, to prevent the Trump presidency, and to make the party sort of institutional, right? When I say party, I'm talking about people who are in those rooms, the donors, you name it. Get them to understand that you're going to lose if you do not show people that you are for them instead of special interests. And unfortunately, that's what ended up playing out.
I have a friend who's a pretty well-renowned scholar internationally. And when Keith Ellison was, like you, being a groundbreaking elected official, he had a chance to meet him right after he won his election. And I remember he told me a story about it. He said, he said to Representative Ellison, he said, we don't need you to be a Muslim congressman. We need you to be the best possible congressman because you're Muslim. What does a story like that mean to you?
It's exactly how I have been legislating, for lack of a better word. I set the standards for myself as high as humanly possible, and I try to get my colleagues to join me, because at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that trust in government is at an all-time low right now, and for good reason. But you change that by being sort of the best customer service centered organization that you possibly can be. Government is supposed to be something that helps. We spend so much of, we give so much of our tax dollars. We hear about it so much. It impacts so much of our lives. And yet somehow the only people that are benefiting are the wealthy and the well-connected and these, contract owners, including, by the way, Elon Musk, who we hear a lot about, but we rarely talk about the fact that he's got billions of dollars in contracts. And to be clear, I used to work for an organization called Deloitte Consulting, right? Like, I've seen the way the contracting world works, and there are times when it's really good. To be clear, there are times where being able to temporarily improve the capacity of government is good. The problem is that a lot of these companies, what they do is they become permanent, sort of, frankly, leeches. And what ends up happening is we pay 10 times what we would normally pay just a full-time employee in government to these corporations who are continuing to rake in profits, giving money to their shareholders, and we as taxpayers end up getting worse and worse outcomes. And so that to me is where it all comes from. Obviously, my faith really does influence me as a person, sort of my ideals around justice and liberty and fairness and care for the poor and feeding the hungry and all of that. And I also recognize that there are a lot of eyes on me because I am incredibly visible. And so my job really is to be the best that I can be, to not bend the rules, to, try my best to make people understand that the issues I'm talking about, even if it's something like Gaza, which is across the ocean, this is how it impacts them, right? This is how, when you support something like this, it makes our freedoms more insecure, right? Puts us at more danger when we allow sort of oppression on one. Inevitably, it comes back on us in a variety of ways.
Then you said it comes back on us in a variety of ways. One of the things I wanted to pick your brain on is how you approach serving your constituents, and especially when it comes to constituents, who were not supportive of you, or might even concerned about you, opposition to you. How have you, through your term, come to grips with that, being that you have to represent?
Yeah, I mean, look, this was, I have my constituents in my district, and I have constituents who are part of the Muslim and Arab community. That's just the reality of being a first, and in my case, being Palestinian, the only in the state. And I had people who were incredibly angry with the way I approached the general election because for me, a Trump administration meant, frankly, just a massive, multiple steps back at this point on everything from the economy to Gaza. And at the same time, when those individuals, whoever they are, right, whether they didn't support me because they think I'm, not a Republican or a Muslim or, too pro-Democrat, whatever the case may be, anytime any of those people came to me for help, for me, my job as a public servant is to help, regardless of whether you voted for me or not. That is a deep belief of mine that I will help you. My job is to help you, whether you voted for me or not. I am your only source of help, right? It's not like if you don't vote for somebody that the other person gets a mini office to do constituent services. No, I am it for them. When somebody is struggling with their social security, I am it for them. When somebody, like we have somebody right now a constituent that we answered, and he actually cried on the phone with my staff. I get like one staffer that I pay for with my campaign funds because we're state reps. We don't get staff like Congress does. But, she was telling me, I was in session. I was like, can you call this person back? They left a voicemail. It seems pretty frantic. And the gentleman was literally crying on the phone because he said that, the Small Business Association or Bureau agency had agreed that he was a victim of fraud. He never took PPP loans, and yet they were still garnishing his Social Security checks. So he was losing out on money. He's already barely on the brink, right? He's losing out on a lot of money. He's hungry. He doesn't know what to do. And we're hearing all these people talk about cutting government and cutting spending and fraud and all this other stuff, and talking about things like DEI, and we're closing down. Like Kelly Loeffler, the head of the agency, was bragging about closing one of the offices in Atlanta, saying that this is what we get for being a sanctuary city, which Atlanta really isn't. But two, I now have this constituent with literally nowhere to go, nowhere to take him, and he is hungry. He is on the brink. He doesn't know what to do. And they're busy tweeting out these culture wars. And as much as I would love to say, hey, who did you vote for me? Did you not vote for me? No, that's not the job. The job is to fix it, because I do firmly believe that I am a representative of the entire district, not just the people who voted for me.
Such a refreshing. It kind of leads me to the next question I wanted to really pick your brain on is, I think most people, and especially, don't tell how important state politics are. And, basically, if they're participating at the local level at all, it's probably for them not even. Can you speak a little bit to why you were fired to run? I know you said you were bullied into it from your community, but like what made you actually pull the trigger on that? And then if you had a message or a story to let people understand that, local and state politics impacts their lives so much more than they that too.
Yeah. So, this is kind of like something I've only recently started speaking about, but around the time that my community really started to push me to do this, my grandfather had passed away. And the thing for me, I remember I had like deleted all my social media. I was gonna just spend the year training for a marathon, kind of doing the things that people do when they're really grieving, like crazy things, right? And I sat down with a community member. He's also like a really good family friend. And I was telling him, I said, I don't think I can lead on Palestine. I don't think I can. Like, this is an open wound and I don't think I can handle it. And he said, you don't have to worry about that. You're a state representative. Your focus is going to be like voting rights and education and, that kind of thing. And to me, when you have people that say, hey, I'm committed to volunteering for you, I'm committed to helping you fundraise, I'm committed to doing this stuff and multiple people across the board, plus you add on sort of the craziness that comes with grief, it was sort of a perfect storm that just kind of pushed me to do it, right? Instead of running a marathon, I ran for office, but
A marathon in its own way, right?
correct, but the reality is that when you run from grief, it inevitably catches up to you. And so within the first year of my first term, that's when, October 7th happened. That's when, Palestine became a central sort of conversation point for a lot of Americans. And I found myself in the middle of that. But, to your question about a story that sort of really underscores the importance of being civically engaged, particularly on a local level, is that we hear a lot about how many people spoke about the presidential election. So many people. And yet when I ask them, did you vote in primaries? Did you vote in your local elections in the past? A lot of them have said no. And that to me is really frustrating because as much as I wish that elected officials would just do the right thing because it's the right thing, I'm tired of hoping for people's better angels to win them over, right? For me, it's about power. How do I create the kind of world where people are incentivized to do the right thing? People have no choice but to do the right thing. Because right now, to be frank with you, a lot of people actually have no choice but to do the wrong thing on Palestine. Unless they have a backup and a community that'll catch them if they do the right thing on Palestine, 9 times out of 10, they're out of there. And so a big reason why I'm able to do what I do is I know there's a community to catch me. My district actually has one of the smallest Muslim populations in the county that I'm in, ironically.
Oh,
But we have built sort of a broad coalition of people that understand that if you hurt one of us, you hurt all of us. And no matter how much I disagree with you, that core tenet is above all else. And that's how you sort of build these coalitions. And so to your question about a story, I've tried to explain to people, we in Georgia on the books right now have a law that says you cannot receive a contract from the state that is over $100,000 and refuse to engage with Israeli companies. It's an anti-BDS law. So you're literally forced to essentially, say, oh yeah, I'll buy from this. I mean, it's so bizarre. We don't even do this about American companies, to be clear, in America itself, but we do this for Israel, and it is in Georgia books. My first year that I was here, the Georgia legislature passed a law that conflated anti-Semitism with criticism of the state of Israel. So it's not like all of these things, every level of government, if this is the only issue you care about, every level of government has been doing something on this. But in addition, what about school board? There are some organizations now that are approaching school boards to mandate that they remove the word Palestine from textbooks, to mandate that they stop talking about the Nakba, that they, pretend that Palestinians never even existed. I mean, when we talk about being involved in schools, like, I have seen, to be fair to our community, I've seen large movements of making sure that students have like halal meals in schools and, Ramadan accommodations and Eid accommodations. But in addition to that, what are we teaching kids? I think a lot of times even Muslims get pulled into the culture wars where it's like maybe 5 people in the entire state, but then there are these much bigger things that happen that we don't even notice because we're so caught up on other things.
so I did want to ask you kind of about that. You had mentioned how, like, because of advocacy from the pro-Israeli groups, that it's permeated everything from local to state to national politics. Um, Kind of permeating that also is Trump 2.0. And I've been loving your series, What's on Fire. I've been posting a few of those on my social media. And I wanted to just ask you, what is your most or your biggest concern about policies coming out from Trump 2.0? And what do you think citizens can do to protect themselves at the local level?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much coming out right now. And the reality is that Republicans control all three branches of government, which means that as much as I wish that we could just blame Democrats for not doing enough, I mean, that's the other frustrating part about this, right? Everybody's like, oh, well, where are the Democrats now? There are actually limitations to being in the minority, unfortunately, and really big ones. And so for me, what I tell people in terms of like what's most concerning, it's the disappearances. It's disappearing people off the streets because the reality situation is that even if you think you're a citizen, you've got your passport, you've got everything, the reality is without due process, those papers mean nothing. And what I mean by due process is that is the process with which you prove that you're a citizen. And right now we're sending people to El Salvador and Guantanamo without any way for them to prove that they are actually citizens. In fact, a recent investigation by several newspapers showed that 75% of those that we have sent to El Salvador right now have no criminal history, no criminal record whatsoever. And on top of all of that, there is no way to bring them back. And I want people to sit with that for a second. If you end up on that plane, mistakenly or otherwise, there is no way to get you out or bring you back. And that is what the Trump administration is saying. So like on the list of things that concern me the most, those disappearances, because it's like the end of the road for a lot of people. The other thing that really concerns me is the fact that right now there's a huge sort of information ecosystem that is full of junk, for lack of a better word. I mean, and I'm talking about like left, right, center, across the board, just terrible, terrible, terrible misinformation. And the reason that concerns me is that if you don't tell people about the reality of a thing, it becomes very difficult for them to fix that thing. And what do I mean by that? Obviously, the typical, like, everyone's blaming Democrats for everything, sure. But in addition to that, what you're doing is you are now taking away the opportunity for people to learn what power they still have. So in our case, yes, you should be protesting, but you should also be talking to your neighbor, getting to know your neighbor, building support systems and ecosystems around you so that if God forbid, if and when these terrible things happen, you've got like a system of people there to help you and protect you and make sure that you are standing with them and together. I've been trying to tell people that as hard as it is, you've also got to talk to your Republican neighbors, to your right-wing neighbors, try to break them out of their information bubbles. I mean, you will not do that by just the internet. You have to talk to each other face to face and break through that information ecosystem. And last but not least, prepare for elections. This is an odd year. So if you're in Virginia, your equivalent of state house, state senate, and governor are up for election this year. If you're everywhere else, you've got municipal races happening. Your mayor is up. Some of your city council members are up. In a place like New York, we have Zohran who is running against Andrew Cuomo. And, he's doing a really great job. But the sad reality, a lot like with Bernie, when everyone's like, oh, Democrats stole the election from him. I mean, sure, but only 20% of us voted in the primary, right? The rest of us didn't even show up. And so as much as I hate to tell people like vote more, vote harder, whatever the case may be, it's actually primaries that determine a lot of seats because of gerrymandering. And when only 20% of us are showing up in primaries, you're going to end up with the kind of candidates you end up with. And by building those connections, even the thing I talked about with community and neighbors and whatever the case may be, those are also future voters. Those are people you bring out with you for your favorite candidate if and when they run for office. And so all of these things are interconnected. The bases that you build for protection and support are the same bases you use to then build political power.
That brings me to another question I want to talk to you about. Is I think now's the time where, as a community and then as a nation, we've I call it neo-Jahiliyyah. Like we've just gone full tribal,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that our community, as diverse as it is, has the ability to bridge a lot of gaps. And I think it takes kind of a maturity from our side to think about like split ticket voting. And, so I even launched a website called Vote Blue Except You Know Who. And the whole idea was to see like who are the supporters of genocide, who are the people putting special interest ahead of Americans, and then a few other, civil liberties issues. But overall, I did this before Biden was pushed out. And the idea was to prevent, this Republican trifecta. Because I thought Trump was going to possibly win, but I just wanted to make sure that if he didn't have the House and the Senate
Yeah.
both. And so, what would be like your message to someone considering to run?
Mhm.
And as kind of to wrap it all up, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? Like, was it resources? Was it
Yeah.
um, just getting out there and doing the shoe leather on the pavement and knocking on doors? Uh, Kind of what was your biggest takeaway from your experience so far?
Yeah, so I actually have been doing political work for over 10 years, specifically in the state of Georgia. So a lot of the sort of organizing and running campaigns, I knew that like the back of my hand. I think what people don't realize is that if you, depending on the level of government, right? If it's Senate, statewide Senate, that requires a much longer ramp than Congress, than state rep, than, depending on how big your city council, right? And so the thing that I try to tell people is that yes, sure, money in politics is a problem and the system is rigged to some extent, but it's not insurmountable. We just saw what happened in Wisconsin against Elon Musk. It's not like these
Fabulous.
people are unbeatable, but it requires a couple of things. One, it requires for us to actually be informed citizens and, to your point, mature enough to recognize that here are my choices on the ballot. I have to directly go to the source, not just what I saw on social media, but directly go to that candidate's website, to that person's information, and look at what they believe, because that's how you get around the money. The money doesn't go into my bank account, it doesn't go into my pocket. The money we fundraise and we get from whoever literally goes right back out the door to either pay our staff and or pay for our ads, whether it's TV, digital, or mail. That's when you get the name recognition out. And if you're interested in running for office, particularly against an incumbent, especially next year, you have to start right now. Like, you better be filing your paperwork in the summer. You better be spending the next 6 months fundraising so that when the next year starts, your biggest sort of time sunk and time that you're spending is on knocking doors, is on building out your team, is on talking to people and getting those endorsements. And I want to be clear, even endorsements can be a hit or miss, right? You might get an endorsement from a very famous member of Congress, but if it doesn't come with money and or talent and or volunteers, that endorsement actually doesn't mean anything, right? And it's actually, this is why I think I do truly look to somebody like AOC, because people love to nitpick, but the reality is that she sent out an email on my behalf after the DNC because she
Oh,
knew before I did that I would need more support than a typical state representative would require, right? I mean, we were flooded. When I say we were like we were inundated to a point of like my poor staffer who just started and was there to run my campaign was now having to act as a also full-time chief of staff. And with one email, she was able to raise $30,000 for us and my team and to be able to hire on an extra fellow. I want more people like that. I want more people who are not just running to get into office, and that's something we do, right? When I fundraise, I tell people, I'm like, I'm fundraising for my campaign, but then I want to have a little bit left over for session to keep a staff member so I can actually govern and not just, hobble my way through session. So when people are running for office, I tell them, give yourself a ramp, a long ramp. Money does matter, but it's not the only thing, and you only need just enough of it to reach your voters. Because after a certain point, the return on investment just isn't worth it either. Um, and you don't need to meet your opposition 1-to-1. If you're a really good candidate, you can actually get away with like a 1-to-6 out spending. It's actually pretty doable. And those were the things that I did, right? When my community told me to run, I said, I can't fundraise to save my life. Are you willing to help me fundraise? And they did, right? We have a lot of doctors, mashallah, lawyers and engineers and people who have the money. They're just not spending it. And when it's a local level, it actually goes so much further. So, getting your stash ready, I guess, for lack of a better word, is important. But also, you got to be so annoying. I mean, that's the best way I can describe it. When somebody says they want to volunteer for you, you got to keep calling them and signing them up for a door knocking shift, for a phone banking shift. You got to do the follow up. You got to keep doing it. As no matter how many likes you might get on the internet, no matter how many likes you might in your video goes viral, that doesn't translate
that
into
translates.
votes. None of it translates. And I think that's why so many in our community were so shocked, because I think a lot of us thought, there were, not me, but a lot of people really did think that these third party candidates were getting all of this traction online and couldn't even break 1 million votes around the entire country. And that's because to get people from their homes and from their phones to the voting booth, takes so much more than just a viral video. And my hope is as we deepen these community connections, as we deepen our understanding of politics as a community, that we're able to be the sort of active margin of victory, active margin of loss, that kind of thing.
I didn't ask you have world, especially regarding the intersection of identities,
Yeah.
freedom.
Yeah, I think my hope is that people recognize that their identity doesn't have to be a negative. It can actually be a very good positive. And we talked about this at the beginning of how, Muslims really can serve as not even just like a medium, but just as a voice of conscience in this world, because we lived under the surveillance state. We experienced a lot of oppression post 9/11. So we understand what's at stake and what can happen when you disappear people, what can happen when your civil liberties are at stake, why these things actually matter, and how they matter for everything else, right? Whether it is your activism, whether it's your job, whether it is, your home, you name it. All of these sort of core tendencies are crucial to a just society. But it also, by the way, requires us to look inwards and recognize our own hypocrisy, right? What are our blind spots? When have we been tricked into going after another minority community that's done nothing to us, right? That actually doesn't have power, but we are being convinced to have a lot of power. Because if you remember, they used to say, Muslims are taking over, they're trying to implement Sharia law, they're trying to do all of this. And
My whole
it's a
career
different,
was fighting
yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, you know this. So like, but we know it was insane because Muslims are less than 1% of the population. And so what I tell folks now is moving forward, anytime somebody tells you blame X group that is a small minority in our country, ask yourself who benefits from the laws that are being passed. Doesn't matter what group it is, doesn't matter how much you disagree or agree with them. What are you being convinced to support? And how does it impact our community? And 9 times out of 10, once I've started getting people to understand that, people have started to understand, okay, we're being manipulated and we gotta get our head on a swivel.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I hope to do this soon. And basically just to really appreciate you and the work you're doing. And I wanted to give you a chance to about you. I think you're at your end of term, so coming up. So if you want to talk about your socials, and then I'll put all of that in the.
Yeah, so we actually just finished our legislative session, and you can find me everywhere at Ruwa, the number 4, Georgia. So that's my handle, ada.com, where you can send us an email. There's a form on our website. We actually just finished our legislative term, so we can fundraise again. And we don't have an election this year, but we are prepping per usual for the next year. And that's the only way we can keep staff. So right now for me, my priority is to keep at least one staff member employed at all times to make sure that even though we're a part-time legislature, my constituents have somebody to reach 100% of the time, whether it's me or that staff member. So, and the other thing is that when we build this kind of infrastructure, that also gives me an ability to help with other races, to influence sort of policy around the whole state, not just in my district.
And thank you for, and I hope you.
Thank you for having me.